What's up, everyone? Welcome to Catholic Champion Show. I'm your host, John Yep, and my co-host, Michael Hichborn. On today's show, we are covering President Trump, U.S. Catholic bishops in Wisconsin, and they're on dueling sides of court cases, and it's pretty interesting. We got a lot for you on today's show. We'll see you in a bit. Welcome to Catholic Champion. We have the results of the Wisconsin race yesterday, which actually there were races in Florida as well, but Wisconsin took center stage, rightfully so. And we have some results from that race. It was Brad Schimmel was going against Crawford for the Supreme Court race. And it was an extremely important race, as you may or may not have known, because it has national implications. Because of the fact that we lost that race, now they will have a liberal majority in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which means what the Democrats always do is that they redistrict the state so that they can have more members of Congress from Wisconsin sent to D.C. So that's going to happen. And they're also going to have a really one-sided opinion on issues like abortion, transgender, voter ID, stuff like that. So it's really a kind of a tragic loss in that sense. Brad was at least from what we can tell, a pretty good Catholic, and relied on his Catholic faith for making this decision in the first place. But it's kind of disappointing news, huh, Michael, with that loss?
Well, it is. And the implications are vast. As you pointed out, it's going to color any kind of decision that has to do with abortion or same-sex marriage or anything along those lines. The liberals now have the majority, but it's also going to play a role in, I think, in this current case that is going to be set before the Wisconsin Supreme Court regarding religious liberty when it comes to Catholic charities. So you're looking at already this decision impacting the Catholic Church. It's going to impact a lot of things. Now, this also sets a majority liberal judiciary in Wisconsin that will act as a foil to Donald Trump, which, a lot of people are going to see that as a win for the liberals. Others are going to see this as something. I don't know how much of an impact it's going to have on the Trump administration, but there are certain cases that are pending there that this will have an impact.
So here's the weird thing. I'm not sure what you think about this. So the good news about this whole thing, about this race yesterday, specifically in Wisconsin, this is even bigger news, like in some ways than Brad losing the race, was that Wisconsin voters decided to enshrine voter ID into their state constitutions. In other words, if you want to vote, you have to show an ID, right? What a novelty. But they, thankfully, they came out very, very strong. In fact, turnout overall in this whole entire Wisconsin race was, on our side, was actually really good. It's better than we, what's typical for an off-year election. I think like the last time we had this in 2022, it was 200,000 voters less showed up to vote on the GOP side. So in that sense, it's a total win. So it's like, why didn't we win? That's anomaly number one. The second anomaly is that the voter ID passed overwhelmingly, which is a good thing, right? By like, in other words, 150,000 people decided to have voter ID, but they decided to vote for the liberal Democrat candidate. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, Michael, what do you? Any insights in that regard? Why that might be the case?
Well, we've seen voter shenanigans before where it looks very much like, look at the downvotes that took place during the 2020 election. You had downvotes going in favor of the Republicans, but the state went blue, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The liberals attributed this to, well, people don't really pay much attention to the downvotes. They're just focused on the national election. Well, maybe, but if that's consistently only on one side of the issue, that speaks to maybe ballot harvesting. So it's kind of an interesting conundrum, and without any hard data, it's hard actually to to posit a theory, but it is suspicious.
It's suspicious, or it's even I think it's also, I think, in some sense, the power once again of personality in elections, right? What President Trump was able to do, and which didn't happen necessarily as much this time, was the people that came out of the woodwork, as Charlie Kirk always says, that shower before work and after work. Those kind of people who are low propensity voters, who politics is like a second thought. They think like us, but they just don't always get out to vote. They came out for Donald Trump. They love the guy. They saw an entire saga played out where they tried to kill him, tried to, just destroy his life. And they came out and voted in November for him. But that wasn't necessarily the case here for Brad. So it's like, okay, why is it? What do we have to do as a Republican Party? What must we do to make sure those low propensity voters come out consistently? And I'm not sure. Questions are being asked right now, and I think it's good that we have this chance. With at least we got the voter ID. That's a big thing, because it's going to be much harder for the Democrats to steal Wisconsin.
Yes,
right, which is such a key state. So anyway, that's we'll see how that one goes. Wisconsin is a battleground state for the near future, and it'll be important in 2026 and 2028. Now, getting into kind of what some interesting things going on here. This was from the Daily Caller, okay? And they pointed out what several of us have already been looking at, the oddity, okay? You have President Trump, the Trump administration, on one hand, we've all been talking about Catholic charities, right? It's been in the center of the news. We wrote a book on it, Charity for Sale, pretty much, going over government charity or Catholic charities and their role with government grants. But you have the Trump administration on one hand is siding with Catholic charities, and then on the other, they are, of course, they ceased federal grants on January 24th, and then there's been a lawsuit back and forth between both sides. So it's kind of an interesting interplay that I want to get into. So the article begins as follows. Again, this is from the Daily Caller. Trump administration defend Catholic charities in key SCOTUS case while fighting organization in lower courts. Ongoing lawsuits involving Catholic charities have put the Trump administration in an unusual position, an ally in one controversy and a primary opponent in another. The Trump administration will back Catholic charities' religious liberty case at the Supreme Court on Monday amid separate legal disputes with the organization over taxpayer funding for refugee resettlement programs. Local Catholic charities agencies are led by the bishop of the diocese, but that gets into it. So let's get into the first case, the one in Wisconsin, Michael. Do you want to give a rundown of kind of what's going on there? I mean, it's you basically have the state of Wisconsin, okay, who has looked at Catholic charities in Superior, which I think it's like on the northern end of the state, right? Who are trying to make the point that, look, the work that you guys do as a Catholic charities organization, it's not religious, okay? And because it's not religious, therefore, you have to pay into, as an employer, the state's unemployment program. Is that going to get the gist of what the case is about?
So that is what the case is about. Is Catholic Charities of Superior a religious organization, or is it a charitable organization? That's the question that's trying to be hashed out. We have to remember when the Supreme or not the Supreme Court, when the federal income tax was issued, and the way the national taxes and the tax exempt status was created in 1943. Okay, that's when this whole thing came about. And what you're looking at,
tax exempt status was created in 1943 in the middle of the Second World War.
Yeah, it was 43. Or was it 46? It was one of the, it was 43 or 46. Now you're making me question.
I'm gonna look it up later. Yeah.
But the bottom line is it was in the 1940s when the tax exempt status was created for religious entities. So the USCCB is a religious entity. Every diocese is a religious entity. Every parish is a religious entity, because they all fall under the auspices of the USCCB, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and anything published within the Kennedy Directory is identified as a religious entity. So that's kind of the key that's been used for forever. If you're listed in the Kennedy directory, you are exempt as a religious entity, a Catholic religious entity. That's how that works. Part of the problem is that you have a lot of entities that claim religious status that really have a for-profit tax model. For instance, Oregon Catholic Press is one of the publishing giants for Catholic hymnals within the United States. They are making an absolute killing by cornering a market. It's almost a monopoly for them and GIA Publications. GIA is a for-profit entity. OCP is a tax-exempt religious entity. They're both doing the same thing. So the question is, how do you have one acting as a religious entity and one acting as a for-profit entity? They're both doing the same thing. They're both supplying hymnals to Catholic churches. So they're performing the same work. They're performing the same service to the church, but one is for profit and the other one is a religion or a religious entity. So if you were looking at what Catholic Charities does, we have to question, what does it mean to be a religious entity? And what does it mean to be something that's not a religious entity, whether it's for profit or simply a charitable agency or what have you? When you have two of the same thing doing the same thing for the same purpose, but they have two different tax statuses, I think it calls a legitimate question to what is it?
And what makes it a religious as opposed to charitable, and where does the line stop? So again, Catholic Charities is arguing that, look, we don't want to pay into the state's unemployment insurance program. So if someone's loses their job at one of our entities, we as the employer don't have to pay this, pay into the state's program.
Yep.
Not that we don't care about our workers, but we want to participate in our, I guess, the local Wisconsin Catholic bishops. They offer a program which is substantially cheaper. So they want to pay into that as opposed to the state's program. So their argument is that, and the states come back and say, no, you can't do that. Now, I think their reasons are very interesting. And it's for me, it's also unique that this goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court itself has to get involved with this. And some of the questions they ask, so you have, it's Becket Fund on one hand, which is representing Catholic Charities, and then the state of Wisconsin on the other hand. The questions that some of the judges asked were pretty funny, or I guess humorous. You have first of all, Justice Alina Kagan pushed back on this, noting some religious specifically shy away from trying to convert people. So her point was, all right, so State's Attorney Colin Roth argued for the nation's Supreme Court this week that Catholic Charities is not eligible for the exemption because, here's why, its daily work does not involve religious teachings. Okay? Yeah. So he's like, look, you guys aren't religious, which is funny because, Michael, you always say on the flip side, I think it is that Catholic Charities, or was it Chris Manuel telling me this, that they specifically make sure that they don't talk about the religion in some way, shape, or form?
Yep. So this would be Catholic Relief Services. And I even had a meeting once with the CRS leadership. And I said, one of the biggest problems that I have with Catholic Relief Services is that you refuse to evangelize. And Sean Callahan, he was a senior executive vice president at the time. He's now the head of CRS. He responded to me and said, "Oh, we evangelize. We just don't proselytize." And I said, "How does that work?" He said, "Well, we're not trying to convert people to the Catholic faith. We're just trying to convert their minds and hearts to a different way of thinking about how to treat people and how to live in the world." And I said, "Well, then you're not even evangelizing to the Catholic faith. You're evangelizing to something else." And I said, but here's the thing. There is a federal stipulation that if you are receiving federal funds for a project, you are not allowed by law to proselytize, to evangelize, to pray, to hand out literature or brochures about the faith. You're not allowed to advertise
Whoa, whoa,
for
whoa.
services.
Are you serious? If you get a federal grant,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot use that money to what we understand as evangelize for real?
That's correct. That is correct.
So the 67 were the millions of dollars. We got concrete numbers too from this other lawsuit case. I think it was like 67 million that was going to be awarded this year for refugee resettlement programs from the government to,
Yep.
they can't use any of that money to make those refugees Catholic, in other words, correct?
That's correct. In fact, it goes a step further. While they are using that money to resettle them, even if they're not using the funds directly to proselytize, to evangelize these people. Say, you've got a bus driver for CRS who's transporting a bunch of refugees from one point to another. If he starts talking about the faith to the passengers while he's driving, that's a violation. And it's something that is prohibited by law for those who are receiving federal funds for a particular project. So he's on that project's dime. Therefore, and the line that they use, the federal government uses, is no God talk on Uncle Sam's dime.
Wow. Okay. Which is interesting, because if you bring that situation back into this with Wisconsin case, again, the state of Wisconsin is trying to push back against Catholic Church, saying, look, you guys aren't religious because you are not trying to convert people. So I guess in some ways their response could be, well, they're not, I mean, they're not getting a federal grant for this too. So just to be clear, at least the Catholic charities in Wisconsin that I know of. So it's not like they're stopped, limited by law from evangelizing, correct? They are, they're saying like, okay, you guys are not actively trying to convert people, which I think it's funny because Justice Kagan just push back, says, well, some religions specifically shy away from trying to convert people, which you have to ask, really? Well, what's the point of your religion if you're not trying to convert people, right? I mean, it's not the whole point.
Right.
I mean, so
the Great Commission specifically states, go into the world and baptize all nations in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching everyone to obey everything that I have taught you. That's the Great Commission.
Right. That Great Commission, which we're supposed to do. And it's funny because 99% of the time, the last thing the state wants to do, the secular state, is to try to bring our religion to the public square, to try to convert. They are thrilled when all we do is we keep it charitable, which is really a false notion of charity, because charity, the ultimate gift that you give somebody is the belief in Jesus Christ, right?
Right.
So, they're more than content. They're happy when we keep it in the closet, right? But now they're saying, look, if you wanted to get these, be exempt, you gotta try to convert people, right? And then it goes on. John Roberts and Justice Alito asked Wisconsin what Catholic Charities needs to do in order to be eligible for the exemption. So they go on offense a little bit. Roth said, this is the state attorney, said employees would have to continuously express and teach the religious belief, such as through mandatory prayer before serving food at a soup kitchen. Kind of funny. So this is the state's definition of what they determine a religious activity. You got to pray before meals. Okay, everybody? You pray before meals, then you don't, it's you're a religious organization. Alito responds, Catholic guy, remember, says that would be sufficient. You don't get the soup unless you pray first. Great response from
So that's I've heard this argument before. And this is not the argument that we would be making when we say that a Catholic charitable entity should be participating and proffering the Catholic faith. In other words, you don't withhold services from someone who doesn't participate in prayer before meals. But as an organization, you should be praying before meals. You should be encouraging the community who comes in to pray. And it's not one or the other. It's both and. Okay. If you come in, you're poor, you're hungry, you're off the streets, we're going to say grace. and you can join us or not, but please be quiet while we do. You say grace, and then you serve the food. You don't deny somebody because they didn't pray with you, but the organization should be taking the initiative to pray and to encourage people to learn and understand the faith for the salvation, the good of their own souls. So it's, I'm actually a little disappointed in Justice Alito's response there, because I think that his response was somewhat obtuse.
Why so? Go deeper into that.
Well, it's obtuse because what he's saying, he took what was said, what would constitute a religious organization? Well, if you're a soup kitchen, we pray before meals. He took that to mean that you don't get food unless you pray. And that would be false. Because if you simply pray as an organization and then serve people, regardless of who joined in the prayer or not, doesn't matter. So he made it an either or as opposed to a both and. You can't. I think he was being a little bit clever by half.
Right. So you would obviously come down in this case and say, look, what Catholic Charities is doing in Wisconsin is a religious activity, correct?
I don't think so.
Really?
To be honest. Right. Because what Catholic Charities does, there are several reasons why I'd say it wouldn't constitute it would constitute a charity, but not a religion. Okay. That's where I would draw the line. I would say it's not a religious entity. First of all, and I'll point this out. I looked through their tax form 990s they're basically around a $20 million a year operation. In 2021, they got $1.7 million in federal grants. So they are certainly.
This is Catholic Charities in Superior.
Yes.
So they got $1.7 million in federal grants. So they have gotten federal grant money.
Oh, yes, they have. Yep.
So they're back to what we said before. To be faithful to the rules of that federal grant money, they are therefore not allowed to evangelize. Therefore,
during the operation of whatever project they got the funding for. So if they want to have mass in their building or something like that, and it's not a part of the government project, that's fine. But if they're driving people from point A to point B on the government's dime as part of a federally funded operation, they're not allowed to do anything religious during that time period.
So can they pray before meals?
Not during. If the government's supplying the food, the answer is no.
Man, okay. Well, I mean, that begs the question too, is that, well, there's several questions. Like, okay, can the government do that? Can the government say,
sure, it's the government's money, they can put, conditions on how what you can use the money for. They can put all kinds of conditions on there. And, I think the bigger question is, should the government be involved in charity issues and faith-based initiatives anyway? And I think the answer is no. Mm-hmm. I would actually rather the Catholic Church get out of the business of being a part of the federal government and just go back.
Sounds like you've read our book, Michael.
I have. But I want to point out a little bit more. So you've got the $1.7 million grant.
Right.
The leadership of this particular Catholic Charities in Lake Superior. You want to hear what they're making?
This is your specialty, bro. Go ahead. What are they making, man? What's the top leadership making?
Their executive directors making $191,000 a year in salary, with $63,000 a year in benefits. So that comes to roughly $355,000 a year to help the poor. Their chief financial officer, $207,000 with $54,000 in benefits. So 255, well, 260 almost. One of their directors, $126,000, another director, $150,000, another director, $116,000, another one, $132,000. These people are making more money than I am. They're making more money than the average, blue collar worker. So why are they getting wealthy to perform the charitable works of mercy? So then the question becomes, are they actually a charity? Because if you're performing the corporal works of mercy, is it something that should be a paid position? Does getting paid to perform the corporal works of mercy make it a job or a vocation? And I think the answer is that once you take upon a certain function as a paid position, your spiritual benefits cease, because as our Lord said, you have had your reward. So now you've not only robbed the individual that you're doing the charitable works for, because you're not performing any of the religious functions of your operation, but then you're also robbing yourself, because you're taking something that you would say is a charity and you think you're doing I'm doing the charitable works of mercy. I'm really helping the poor and I'm helping
I
God
mean,
and I'm doing
they got to make some money because I mean, like
you know what? I think that this is part of the problem of the industrialization of charity itself, because charity was never meant to be a paid position. It was meant to be something that was done out of the good works of the poor people that entered into the religious communities to serve the poor. And they weren't doing it for a salary. They weren't doing it for a job. They were covered in their cost of living, such as it was, but they were voluntarily living on very little, voluntarily living on, one set of clothing and sleeping on a hard floor, most of them without a blanket. So I think that the problem that we have here right now is that the definition of charity has been completely upended. Now the government's trying to figure it out, but they don't have a religious foundation to figure it out with.
That's okay. So that is interesting. I mean, that's the whole debate. Like, I think there's got to be some compensation because it's the amount probably, right? And that's why there is you're talking about the philosophy of charity, which is extremely important. I think there's something similar. That's how the legal system works. Now we're looking at nonprofits, right? They have to do commensurate studies for the employees of the top or at the top leadership of nonprofits to see if it actually is, they can't make $1 zillion, right? Because at the end of the day, they belong for the community, right? They're property of the community. It's what a nonprofit is essentially. No one really owns it. The community owns it, so to speak, right? So, but there's got to be some compensation. But what you're saying, which I agree with, is that it can't be a crazy amount where it totally obfuscates the primary purpose, which is to serve, correct?
Well, here's even AI, Google AI. I'm going to read you something. All I did was type in paid to perform the corporal works of mercy. Here's what
does Grok teach?
Well, not Grok. This is Google AI.
Okay.
It says, while the Catholic Church encourages performing the corporal works of mercy, it's not typically understood as a paid profession. And then later on, it says, are they paid positions? It says, while some organizations like Catholic Charities or social service agencies may employ individuals to assist with these works, it is not common to be paid specifically to perform the corporal works of mercy themselves. So even AI recognizes that there's something off about paying somebody to perform the corporal works of mercy. If you the whole definition of charity,
but are you going I mean, I think it's extreme. Like, you can't just wipe away the salaries of all these people who are leading nonprofits, or even with our priests in every single one of the dioceses, they all make a salary, right?
Yes, so a priest is not getting paid to provide the corporal works of mercy, nor is the priest being paid to perform the sacraments. That would be simony. So he is paid a stipend in order to provide for the cost of living, because it's a lot easier just to go ahead and give the priest a certain amount of money to say, okay, here's enough for you to live on. And it comes from the diocese. It's not
what is the philosophical difference between a salary and a stipend?
So a stipend is, I give to you out of the goodness of my heart, and it's not expected and it's not required. A salary is a quid pro quo. I do work, you give me pay. So there's a transactional notion to what's being done, as opposed to what charity truly is, which is, I'm going to do something. So let's put it this way. If you have a ceiling fan that you want to install in your house. And you call me up and you say, hey, can you come over and help me install my ceiling fan? And I said, yeah, sure. Absolutely. More than happy to help. And I went to your house and I installed the ceiling fan for you. And you handed me $50 and you said, I really appreciate this. Here, I just want to I want to help you out here. Just take $50. That's not pay. You, out of the gratitude and goodness of your heart, said, I want you to have something because you came over to help me. As opposed to you calling me up and my saying, well, if you pay me $50, I'll come over and install your fan for you. Now it's salaried work. You see the difference? It may be subtle, but the point is that on the one hand, the intention that I have is to go to your house to do something good for you without any expected compensation, without any recourse, because I want to help you. That's the only goal here. And then when you give me $50 out of the goodness of your heart, because you really do appreciate what I have done, then what you're doing is you're giving a gift. You're not paying somebody for the work that was done. But if it becomes transactional, well, where I say, if you pay me $50 to come over and install your ceiling fan, and then I go over, I install it, and you hand me $50, now you're paying contracted work. There's a big difference.
Okay, so Michael, you are coming in with basically on the side of the state of Wisconsin, and I understand your points that Catholic Charities is not a religious activity.
I don't think it is,
because here are the two reasons, everyone. Pretty much, it's because, and there's some good points. Number one, it's it's the at least the amount of money that they get almost tarnishes the charitable religious dimension of the worker when they're paying what $354,000 per year. So that in itself almost kind of takes away at least the top staff, right? But even more fundamentally, what you pointed out, when our tax money, when Uncle Sam gives $1.7 million, was it last year, to Catholic Charities in Wisconsin, that's with the legal stipulation that they are not allowed to. What word they actually use in the federal in their the right is evangelize? They're not allowed to evangelize in the work that they do. So it can't be religious, because what is religion anyway? I mean, it has a legal definition. It has a theological meaning. Religion is like literally comes from what etymology? It's like it's to bind, right? It's our it's our duty towards the divine, right? We're paying back to God, right? Which is expressed specifically in our neighbor, because God says, love your neighbor as you know. So it's like you're not allowed to do that. So therefore, I understand what you're saying. You know, you side with the state of Wisconsin, guys. You're not a religious institution, correct?
Yeah, that's actually where I would come down on this. I don't think that they qualify either legally or even according to the church's own definition of what charity is, because charity comes, we have to remember, charity comes from the Latin root caritas. Caritas is love. So when you look at Thomas Aquinas's definition of love, it says he says specifically that it is the will of the good of the other without recourse to the self. If that's the definition of love, which is the definition of caritas, which is the definition of charity, then what we're saying is that if you're not willing and performing the good for the other without recourse to the self, but you are expecting compensation, then you're not performing charity, you're performing a job.
Which I think is also more intellectually coherent in your position as it translates over to the other side, right? Where we have the Trump, and I'm going to get to this article too, about the U.S. bishops to appeal loss and fight with Trump over refugee funding. And it's the same kind of narrative that you would say that what the Catholic Charities has done at the southern border for the past 4 years, specifically under President Biden, it's neither religious nor is it charitable, by the way, because of what they've done, right? So let's get into this case here. You have a federal judge has denied a request from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to compel the Trump administration to reinstate its contracts with the conference and resume paying it for expenses for resettling refugees in the United States. So Trump, 3 days after he gets in office, he cuts off federal grants, right? The USCCB sues the Trump administration. We all remember the headlines. Bishops go after Trump, right? Well, U.S. District Judge Trevor McFadden wrote that the federal court lacks the authority to order the government to honor its recently terminated contracts with the Bishops' Conference. Okay, so no, which by the way, and this judge was appointed by President Trump in 2017. This is like the opposite of the judicial warfare that we're seeing right now on the other side of the left. What's the guy's name? The one judge who has, he's a total crazy liberal whack job who shot down 3 of Trump's last decisions, right? He's basically saying, as a lower court, I am more important than what the will of the people has voted into D.C. So he has stopped, like literally there was the airplane that was flying to Venezuela or Colombia with the illegal immigrants, had to turn around and fly back because the court, this lower court, said what Trump, who got one of the largest victories in American history, decided is no bueno, so fly back, right? This judge, on the other hand, Trevor McFadden, saying, look, I'm important, but not so important that I can reverse the executive branch's decision on this.
Right.
So the bishops are appealing the March 11th ruling. The relief the conference seeks in its preliminary injunction, reinstatement of contracts determined by the government, is beyond power. Okay, got that. The attorney for the bishops' conference filed notice on March 12th that they were appealing his decision. The bishops' refugee resettlement contracts with the federal government remain canceled for now, and the conference will not be paid for its ongoing work of refugee resettlement. Okay. Yep. Not refugee, by the way, and in the really the legal definition of what a refugee is in the first place. Right. Okay. The conference said in court documents it's still owed. Here we go. The bishops say that they are owed $13 million in reimbursements from the federal government. Parentheses, when you hear federal government, that's $13 million
tax dollars.
Every one of us listening on this show. Okay. So bishops are saying, look, whoa, you cut off our contracts. We're owed $13 million of the American citizens' money so that we can resettle and further disrupt the poor communities in our nation's cities around America that have been completely overwhelmed by the system, along with all the fentanyl, drugs, human trafficking, everything that's poured through the southern border. We need that money. Give us that $13 million back. Isn't that absurd? It really is. I mean, this is like nice legal language, but when you actually break it down into what it means, it's insane.
I want to read to you something from the article that you were just reading. There's a paragraph here that says, in a subsequent filing on February 27th, attorneys for the Bishops' Conference wrote that the contract's terminations violated several federal laws and that the funding suspension continued to, quote, inflict irreparable harm. Irreparable harm. Let's look at what kind of irreparable harm we're talking about, because you mentioned $13 million in unpaid contracts, right?
Right.
Guess what the USCCB's financial assets at the end of 2023 were?
I can only imagine. What that's what's visible, by the way.
Almost $305 million. I think they can afford to cover the $13 million loss. I think they could even afford to cover the $64 million loss that they were talking about.
It's not a cash flow problem.
Yeah, it's not a cash flow problem, and it's not going to cause irreparable harm. And anybody who looks at the U.S.
say that they had to lay off 55 employees, which is true. Right?
Okay, so they did, but that was their decision. That was their decision not to release funding from the USCCB in order to cover the cost.
Very, very solid point. The USCCB spokesman, Chieko, is how you spell his name? Chieko Noguchi, responded, while we do not agree with the court's decision, we will continue to advocate for refugees. Okay, great. Okay, sounds nice. We are reviewing our options to ensure that the newly arrived refugees and their families who were assigned to our care by the State Department are not deprived of assistance promised to them by the United States. Again, you are just showing it during the show or learning about this whole topic, what's going on here. It sounds nice that, poor, you're probably thinking poor Catholic nuns, devout Catholic nuns are just receiving these poor people into the country, and they're just trying to take care of them. There's no one else to take care of them, and they're just guys, this is a system, right?
Yeah.
This has been a machine for the past 4 years where they're buying plane tickets and they're getting these minors and they're just shipping them off to you name it, the creepiest dudes around, right? And you never hear from these kids again. Catholic Charities has been involved with this at the Southern Border. Not all the Catholic Charities members, there are a lot of saints probably in the organization, but at least some top people have got to know what's going on. And these are the guys that are complaining that they ran out of money to do this activity. Right. Okay. The McFadden's decision is setback for the conference. Is a setback for the conference, which filed its federal lawsuit on the February 18th, almost a month after the Trump administration ordered a foreign aid to be frozen during the 90-day review. Okay. The bishop's lawsuit says the Trump administration's pause in foreign aid harmed newly arrived refugees. It was a blow to the conference, the largest non-governmental program to resettle refugees. Blah, 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 blah. The last thing I'll say is this. Nearly 7,000 refugees. This is where they get concrete on numbers. The beauty of lawsuits, so you kind of sometimes you get more of this information via lawsuits. Nearly 7,000 refugees had been assigned by the government to the bishop's resettlement program. It's got to be more than that, by the way. Under 2 contracts, court record said, for the 2025 fiscal year that awarded the conference $65 million for initial resettlement expenses. $65 million of our money going to further bring refugees, which are not refugees, into the country, right? And they're complaining about it. Interesting, huh?
Incidentally, during the Obama administration, I gave a speech back in 2014 regarding the kind of money that the USCCB was getting from the federal government. There was a program that was run by the Obama administration to pay $2,500 per head regarding refugees that were being resettled. Now, if the USCCB is still using that same program, $2,500 a head times 7,000 heads is $17 million. That's the kind of loss just in terms of that one particular program revenue that they're looking at. This isn't $2,500 that was going to the refugee. This is $2,500 that was going to the agency that was resettling them. That's profit.
That's crazy. Those are crazy numbers. And this is not money that's just free out there. We are in debt. I mean, if people are, we're supposed to be caring about the poor people. Okay, fine. 80% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Okay. That's due to inflation. Why is that inflation? Government spending. Okay. On giving away money that we don't have. Okay. If we really care about that, right? Again, this is all the context. If it's one thing to say, these people are coming across, no one is here to take care of them, we got to help them.
Yep.
That would be more believable if these same individuals would be speaking up and saying, we got to have a secure southern border. Let's close the southern border. Let's get ourselves in order. They weren't. In fact, they were opposing Trump, the whole idea with the wall in the first place, right? So it's people are seeing through it. That's a good thing.
Well, the whole definition of refugee is a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. So when there's a sense of urgency and somebody says, my house is gone, my community is gone, everything got wiped out because of the tidal wave, or the enemy moved in and they bombed our village and we have nowhere to live, something along those lines, or, we now live under oppressive communist rule and we escaped our country and we're looking for help. We're looking for someplace to live so that we don't have to live under communist oppression. That is what a refugee is. Somebody that's simply looking for a better life doesn't have the right to come into our country and say, I'm poor, I'm coming to the US because you've got better amenities than my country does. And we want to get your free goods because you've got them and we don't down here. That's not a refugee. That's somebody looking to immigrate, looking for a better life. They don't have a right to come across the border and be resettled as refugees. And this is part of the problem, is that the USCCB, Catholic Charities, and even the federal agencies that under the Obama administration, under the Biden administration, they were not properly defining what a refugee is. And they were just saying anybody that comes across a border, stick them with a tag, refugee, and send them across.
What Catholics for Catholics is trying to do here, everyone, we're not just sitting around complaining like this is crazy, let's stop this, blah, blah, blah. What we're trying to advocate, and it's not just through this podcast, it's we're trying to create a solution to the problem, okay? Because we've all seen it in one way, shape, form, or the other, that there is there's a silence, an obvious silence from so many areas of church leadership over the past, I mean, you could go back, 1960s or before, right? And people have seen this. I mean, it culminated in things like in the June 2021 USCCB meeting, when they had so much pressure on them to bar President Joe Biden from reception of Holy Communion, okay? They punted. They did not go there. Yes, they came up with the bishops or the Eucharistic Revival Conference, which did some good stuff at a cost of whatever, $70 million, okay? But the reality is they could have achieved a lot more if they had held their ground and defended the Eucharist, right? There are reasons for this silence on so many different areas, spiritual as well as practical. This thing that Michael and I have been talking about the last 35 minutes is a very practical thing, is that we have become beholden to Uncle Sam, okay? Michael said it himself. When you get money from the government, you are not allowed to evangelize. Okay, that's one of the regulations from this. Chris Manning wrote the book Charity for Sale. Okay, this book Charity for Sale details that it was not always like this. In the when America was founded, the first 120 years or so before the USCCB began in like 1919, there was many great works of Catholic charity, right? True. It was from the people. There was no money that came from the government, right? And then it gradually started to change over the course of especially the 1960s, okay? And had devastating consequences. So charity is not for sale. And that's what we're trying to advocate for, the solution to free the church so that she's not the spouse of mammon, but she's the spouse of Christ here in this country. Is that fair enough? A simple summation of what we're about
Absolutely.
here?
Well, and the simple solution is for the Catholic Church. And here's the thing. If the Supreme Court, they're arguing over whether a Catholic Charities is a charity or a religion, or is it both or neither, the simple answer is, if it was being run by nuns and priests, and what they were doing was going to the community, they weren't drawing a salary, they were simply taking the goods that were handed to them by the good, faithful Catholics that want to help the poor, going into the community and helping people to the best of their ability, that's charity. And it's a religion because they are religious and they are going into the community and they are proselytizing, they're preaching, they're teaching about Christ, they're talking about the nature of the soul and what salvation is. They're bringing the good news. That's the definition of religion. So from a Catholic standpoint, the solution to the problem of all of these Catholic charities that are basically NGOs with a bunch of paid workers who may or may not even believe what the faith teaches is to eliminate them and to reinstitute religious orders that are designed specifically to perform the function that they stopped performing back in the 60s. They dropped the habit of doing the corporal works of mercy, and the government was forced to pick it up.
Well said. Well, we've knocked them a little bit. Let's give them some credit here. U.S. bishops call on Congress to defund abortion and gender transitions. The USCCB called on Congress to defund the abortion and gender transition industries. A letter from the bishops to Congress dated March 27th reaffirms the bishops' opposition to taxpayer funding for the murder of preborn children and gender mutilation practices. Thank you, bishops. Amazing. Thank you. We need more of that. Thank you for that leadership. Yep. It notes that the Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion business in the country, is also the second largest supplier of hormones for gender transition. Get that through your head, everyone. Planned Parenthood is not just about killing babies in the womb, okay? they're the leading agency in gender mutilations of kids. The letter from the bishops adds that while policies like the Hyde Amendment block direct federal funding for elective abortions, Planned Parenthood still receives nearly $700 million each year in taxpayer money, which is around 1/3 of its revenue. And Trump has since declared a freeze on that, right? At the same time, Planned Parenthood continues to reduce its non-abortion services and has increased its promotion of gender ideology, right? Blah, blah, blah. So that's awesome. That's a win. We want that. We need to be speaking up on that. We need that clarity.
This actually happened a couple of years ago. I did some research in Catholic hospitals, Common Spirit Health, the largest Catholic hospital network in the United States. And I found that many of them—
not giving us enough credit on that. The report that you did really hit a lot of the mainstream outlets, picked it up, and it was tremendous work. And it was shocking to so many people, as it is shocking, right? So it's worth going back on that. So yeah, what did you find, Michael?
We found that Common Spirit Health, the largest Catholic health network in the country, was complicit in the performance of sex change operations. They were promoting transitioning to young kids, kids as young as 15. And, we exposed this. I didn't realize this at the time, but the report, when we issued it, came out during the week when the USCCB was meeting to discuss updating their ethical guidelines with regard to hospitals and medical practitioners. And they were debating, should we include something on transgenderism? And then at the end of the week, after our report was published, they came down overwhelmingly on the side of, yes, we're going to update it. And what they updated it with was great. They said any Catholic hospital is not permitted to perform or advocate for any of this gender ideology, transition, whether it's hormonal or physical or whatever it is, surgical. You're not allowed to transition. You're not allowed to advocate for transitioning. So it was a fantastic document. It really set the tone. The question is, are the Catholic hospitals following policy? Well, we're looking into that too.
To be seen as more comes out in that story. So I had to point out, part of the reason I brought this article, but yeah, we want to applaud the bishops for speaking up about this. And Trump should be made aware, like, we got to stop this. And he's totally in favor of stopping the gender mutilation of kids, right? Which is great, but on one hand, you have the bishop saying this, and seems like this is insane. Okay. From this headline, Cardinal Fernandez issues clarification to Vatican document to suggest church approval of gender mutilation in severe dysphoria cases. Just for all the people out there, especially in the conservative side, or just I hate to use the word conservative, liberal Catholics. I mean, that are not heretics. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yet try to make the point that this is an ordinary time in church history. I don't think this is ordinary. Okay. Yeah. You got the bishops' conference rightfully trying to stop the demonic, push to mutilate kids. And then on the other hand, you have, this is the cardinal. This is the head of the doctrine of the faith. Okay. Mm-hmm. The guy who's supposed to be in charge of safeguarding the faith, which ultimately I know is the Pope, and it's okay. But the Pope has chosen this guy. Do I even have to mention this guy's name? I mean, what a scandal. Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. This is the guy who wrote Saname con tu boca, the Heal Me with Your Mouth book, right? Yep. In a striking
worse.
What?
He wrote worse.
Yeah. That's for another episode, right?
Yeah.
It's in a striking departure from established church teaching, Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. This is all happening within days of each other. That's why the paradoxes are insane. You have paradox. On one hand, the Holy Father is saying Trump walls are horrible. Let everyone come through. And in the same month, he updates the Vatican norms. Right. Come to prison for 5 stinking years if you cross into Vatican territory. It's a joke.
Yeah, exactly.
And what we're trying to do is call out the hypocrisy a little bit respectfully. Yes, we realize we're talking to shepherds in the figure of Christ. We want to have humble submission to their authority, spiritual authority. But come on, guys, give us a helping hand. We're trying to evangelize, okay?
Right.
You guys are causing a scandal.
It's worse than that. I mean, he's setting a horrible moral precedent as the head of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. It's the problem of Solomon. You know, you've got the two women who are arguing over a baby, and so Solomon says, fine, give me the baby, I'll cut the baby in half and give the two women a half each. Well, the woman who is the true mother said, no, give the baby to her. But the reason behind this is that ownership of a dead baby does nothing. It's over. It's done. You bury the baby. Then both are deprived, right? Well, the same is true for moral theology, that you cannot split that which is intrinsic. Okay? If you have an intrinsic evil and it's always evil in and of itself, you can't split that baby and say, well, there are some circumstances where it's not intrinsic. That's not true. Just because somebody's got a mental illness does not justify the mutilation of genitals, nor does it justify chemical castration or anything else within those lines. It's the same precedent that you would set by saying, well, at some point, in some circumstances, it may be argued that abortion is actually a legitimate practice, that you can, in fact, kill a baby because of the mental state of the mother. Well, because that's what he's saying. It's the same argument. You're just swapping out circumstances. It's the same argument. And then you can apply that to contraception. And then you can apply that to just about anything, even idolatry, idol worship. You could apply it to anything that is intrinsically evil and say, well, at some point, it is acceptable practice because of mental circumstances.
It is so typical of this pontificate, not only from the Holy Father and the documents that have come out, but also the people that he's appointed to go after. It's a war against intrinsic evils. It's the destruction of intrinsic evils, like trying to say, yeah, it's evil, but it's allowed in this case. Specifically, he says, this is Cardinal Fernandez, okay? Rather than reiterate the document's opposition to the legitimacy of gender mutilation surgery outright, the prefix suggests, kind of what you were saying, Michael, that its morality depends on the severity of a person's suffering.
Yep.
Therefore, it's no longer intrinsic. Okay.
Right.
It's circumstantial. It's the war against it. You know, it's a Mors Laetitia footnote number 8 all over again.
That's right.
Right. This is all. It's a repeated pattern. The destruction of the intrinsic evil. There is no absolute evil, and therefore
it's a repeated rejection of the principle of non-contradiction.
That's right.
The principle of non-contradiction says that nothing can both be and not be at the same time. This is a true statement because you can't have existence and non-existence simultaneously. Well, what they're doing is they're saying that there's no such thing as a principle of non-contradiction within the moral law. So now they want to say that something can be both moral and immoral simultaneously. And that's impossible. It's a logical contradiction. You cannot have that. But they're trying to find circumstances where they can make it seem like that is possible. And so that's why they're giving these circumstantial positions for the performance of something that is gravely immoral. But this is called proportionalism, which was formally condemned by Pope John Paul II. So this is, they're going against the church here. And it's happening at the highest echelons, which is the biggest problem.
It is, and this is so detrimental. Okay, Catholics have such a role in this country. Okay, all faiths do, right? This nation cannot exist without a moral people, right? The founding fathers knew that. Okay, the Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, they are grounded on intrinsic goods. Okay, on things on truths that can't change. And when you have the church itself, the highest levels, trying to destroy that very basic principle that there are some truths and moral truths which can never be violated. What that does to undermine a true democracy is catastrophic. Okay. Right. And that's why we're harping on this point, not just to point out this cardinal says this. I mean, that's just like church talk. Who cares? But what it does psychologically to the Catholic people, which has a spiritual duty to bring, our faith with all the rich and support the concept, right? It's horrible. It's evil.
intrinsically evil.
It's intrinsically evil, man. How about okay, we're wrapping up. We're getting near the end of the show. I mean, talking about some really good stuff. How about a quick break? I saw this clip today, and it was pretty awesome. Okay, I want to get Michael's comments on this. Let's put the Jim Banks clip up there.
Hi, I was a worker at HHS. I was fired illegally on February 14th. There are many people who are not getting social service programs, especially people with disabilities. Are you going to do anything to stop what's happening?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it?
You probably deserved it.
I deserved it.
Dude,
Wow.
That's sad.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Why did I deserve it?
Because you seem like a clown.
Okay, sir, you shouldn't have said that.
Can you? I mean, first of all, everyone, that's Senator Jim Banks. Okay, he's probably one of the most religious members in the United States Congress. He's a really good man. Like, that is not what I would expect. Like, first thing. Secondly, like, that could have appeared in a movie. That was choreographed so well. Okay.
Yep.
You have this dude who's like, he was probably paid to go there and complain. And, you know, it's probably his second job to be a professional complainer to get like media hits, I would imagine. Right. And so, fine. He goes and it's like essentially going back to your old bosses and saying, you know, it was unfair that you fired me. Okay. And what a great answer. And then just the elevator closing right there at the moment. I mean, so spot.
Curtain closed.
Very closed. I mean, and the ladies, like the comment from the lady at the end, oh my gosh, you're going to regret having this on camera. Actually, no. Okay. Americans are sick of this. We're sick of finding individuals who have never grown up. Okay. And, you know, this happens to be the 80th anniversary. We're not gonna play the clip now, but this is the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Battle of Okinawa. It was April 1st, right? Yesterday. You had some true American heroes that stormed those beaches in the largest naval land sea operation ever. Okay. And you know, you had Catholic priests there too as well who were there, and Father Francis is one of them. He was actually killed in combat, but these are real men. Okay. We need to get back to that. We need to get back to the men and women who were willing to die for what they believe in. Okay, not this whining crap that we just saw just a few moments ago. So kudos to Senator Jim Banks. Grateful for that that shutdown.
Oh, it was a great comment. No,
great comment. Well needed, much deserved.
I saw one the other day that was very similar, where somebody was they were hounding or berating. I don't know if it was a senator or I don't know who it was. I don't remember, but it was a similar circumstance. And he turned around, he gave some sort of statement that just absolutely shut them down, and then turned around and went through the door to get in his office. And that was the end of it. But I'm seeing more of that. And it's really edifying.
It's part of the Trump effect too. I mean,
Yeah.
breaking through of the PC political correctness. I mean, it's true. It's a war for truth. And you're not going to shout out also to Candace Owens. I mean, you may not agree with everything that she is saying, but that woman, from I've known her personally now a little bit here, she is sincerely trying to speak her mind and speak the truth on so many different issues. She's been nailing it recently with the whole RFK, JFK, CIA assassination. Like, that's what we need. You know, she said herself in her latest podcast, like, for us to get back to the country that we need, to sorely save the country, we have got to be willing to be called every single name in the book for the sake of truth.
Right. Well, it's like I said to somebody recently, you can't dialogue with somebody who believes the only way for them to survive is to eat you.
Say that again?
You can't dialogue with somebody who believes the only way to survive is to eat you.
Well, there you go.
You don't dialogue with zombies. You don't dialogue with vampires.
Absolutely.
You know, and these people, they look at the American people as sheep to be fed off of. They look at us as a cash cow, as a source of revenue, and as an inconvenience when we vote them out.
Absolutely. Be sheep that follows the good shepherd, right? That's the only kind of sheep you want to be. Final thoughts here, Michael, as we kind of wrap this up here.
I don't really have any final thoughts. I think that we pretty much put it all on the table. I think the discussion on charity, the nature of charity, is probably one of the most important ones that we've had in a long time. And I think that it's time for the church to actually have a reevaluation of what true charity really means, because if we don't have a return to the religious orders, that's really where it's got to begin and end. We have to have a return to the religious orders, because it's those religious orders that provide the spiritual and moral foundation for a good people. And you're not going to get that by paying hirelings who are going to go into the community and do a job.
Absolutely. And, it's what we need to be talking about, bringing these issues up at the forefront and keeping in mind just the power of it. All starts with prayer, right? Prayer is what's going to fuel this rebirth in America, Catholicism and what we believe. And I just, and on a positive note here, really quickly, there is a case that I know quite well, where there was a miracle. It seems a miracle that's happened with a boy named Vincent, who fell into a pool about a month ago.
Yep.
Now, individual is actually a member of our parish, okay? And it was our parish priest, his nephew, okay?
Oh, gosh.
Father Dan Keneally, who's a good man, and he, his kid or his nephew that was underwater for about 55 minutes, okay, or something like that.
Underwater?
I don't know, underwater, but had no pulse for 55 minutes.
Okay.
All of us began we've all been part of these, like, hey, these text chains, like, pray for this individual. We always do. A lot of us do, right? But like, I saw this in action. It was insane, Michael. Like, we were, as a local community, via the text messages, meet up to church, whatever, we were all praying before this even became a news story.
Yeah.
And we were praying specifically. It was two people. It was Father McGivney, and then Cardinal Pell is who they were praying to for intercession. And you can read the details on our site. And so other agencies that have carried this as well. Vincent made a full recovery. Okay,
Yep.
He came out of it just with no brain damage, nothing. I mean, truly,
No brain damage, no heart damage, no lung damage, which really truly is a miracle. To go 55 minutes without a pulse and 55 minutes without respiring on your own, to not even have lung damage. I mean, drowning victims usually get pneumonia. The ones that survive a drowning, they usually get pneumonia afterward because their lungs are inflamed. But for him to not even get that truly is miraculous.
Is miraculous and tribute to the power of prayer. There's another miracle which we won't get into. There's too many miracles to go over, but it just shows you God is working. We have that case of it was a young lady, right? Young lady in Michigan who she was cured of a brain tumor.
Yes.
And she prayed to Blessed Solanus Casey.
Yep.
There in Michigan. So this is the
showed up, and there are no tumors in her brain at all. They're all gone.
Insane. God is still very much at work, and we need to just keep going out to him, especially in this holy, holy time. We're getting near the most sacred time of the year, Holy Week and Easter. And let's end also with a special prayer, a special request to St. John Paul II, who passed away. It was 23 years ago today. I want to show you the clip. Just kind of, most of us remember that moment. I remember it very, very well. When he passed away, the exact moment. And this is what happened during a Polish soccer game. Big soccer game going on.
Wójcik do Telichowskiego. Wbiegł kibic na boisko. Przerwany mecz. Sytuacja, w której jednoczymy się wszyscy dziś przez cały dzień w cierpieniu i oczekiwaniu na dobre wiadomości. Ta, która dotarła do nas, przypominam, nieoficjalnie, jest bardzo smutna i mówi o odejściu od nas na zawsze jednej z najwybitniejszych postaci historii, jednego z najwybitniejszych Polaków. Kibice zaintonowali hymn. włoskiej do Polski. Wielokrotnie przyjeżdżał Jan Paweł II, dając nam nadzieję, otuchę w trudnych momentach historii naszego narodu.
That was the moment that they found out, the soccer team, that John Paul II, their national hero, had died. And I thought it was so, that was spontaneous. It was not planned. They actually went up to the referee, said, "Stop the game. This is our heroes, our saint." And Michael, do you remember the moment that John Paul II died? And maybe you don't have. Where were you?
At home, and I remember watching just the vigils taking place. I think I was watching EWTN, and they announced the exact time. And outside, all of a sudden, this massive downpour of rain right outside.
I was in seminary. Yeah, I was in seminary, and we were actually just about to go down to New York to participate in the Eucharistic procession that Cardinal O'Connor had started in New York City down to New York. So we were on our way from Connecticut to New York, and when our rector came out and just told us, and just remember the dead silence, and then us marching in that procession with the Eucharist and our cassocks and our surplices down in the streets of New York, when the whole world, everyone thought we were doing a procession to honor John Paul II. It was actually whatever was for the Eucharist, and it was a special moment. I have devotion to that saint in a special way, John Paul II, and a lot of us do. And just what a memory of a man. I know he's not perfect, you could argue back and forth on that. But he's a saint, okay? He's in heaven. No one's perfect except Our Lady and Jesus Christ. And so let's end with that note. Just keep our minds on the saints who have gone before us. They are Catholic champions. They're the champions of what it means to be a Catholic in the public sphere, bringing their faith. And we ask for his intercession upon all of us today and our families. This is Catholic Champion. We will see you next week, same time, same place. God bless, and fight on.